Chocolate Day had never been about grand gestures for me. It was always about the quiet confirmation that we still knew each other. That morning, the light in the kitchen came in softer than usual, filtered through the half-open blinds like it was trying not to interrupt anything. I remember standing barefoot on the tile floor, the cold grounding me, while the coffee machine hummed its familiar rhythm. Everything felt settled. Not exciting, not dramatic, just secure. That was the word I would have used back then. Secure. Chocolate Day sat there on the calendar, small and unassuming, scribbled in the corner like a private reminder rather than a public event. I didn't circle it. I didn't highlight it. I didn't need to. It was already folded into our routine, the way things become when you've been with someone long enough. I had planned it the night before, quietly, without telling anyone, not because it was a secret, but because I liked the idea of it being mine. I stopped at the store on my way home the previous evening, choosing chocolates the same way I always did, not by price, not by packaging, but by familiarity. Dark chocolate, sea salt, the kind he said he didn't crave but always finished. I remembered the way he used to break a piece in half and leave the other half on the counter, as if saving it for later meant something. I didn't buy anything extravagant. I never did. Chocolate Day to me wasn't about proving love. It was about continuing it. At home, I placed the bag carefully on the counter, away from the heat, away from the mess of daily life. I even moved it twice, adjusting its position like that somehow mattered. I remember straightening the bag once more, like alignment itself mattered that day. I rehearsed the words in my head. Not a speech, not anything dramatic, just a simple acknowledgement. Something soft, something that fit who we were. I remember thinking, this is enough. That morning, he moved around the house like he always did, shoes by the door, phone in hand, keys placed absent-mindedly on the counter. Nothing about him felt distant or unusual. He kissed my cheek before leaving, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything, didn't promise anything, just existed. "Happy Chocolate Day," I said lightly, almost playfully. He smiled. The same smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Comfortable, easy, familiar. "You remembered," he said. Of course I did. I always did. After he left, the house settled back into its quiet. I wrapped the chocolates in a small bag, not gift-wrapped, not styled for a photo. This wasn't something I planned to post or announce. It was just something I planned to give. As the day moved on, everything felt normal. I answered emails, I folded laundry, I cleared a few unread messages without urgency. I made a mental note to pick up groceries later. At some point, I checked our shared account balance while paying a utility bill, the way I always did. Not out of concern, just habit. The numbers were steady, healthy. We'd crossed $48,000 in savings not long ago, a milestone we talked about casually, without celebration. It had felt like proof that we were building something real. Money, for us, had never been emotional. It was practical, transparent, shared. We'd planned trips we hadn't taken yet, renovations we kept postponing, conversations that started with someday and ended with soon. He'd mentioned his performance bonus earlier that month, around $15,000, in the same tone someone mentions the weather. No excitement, no secrecy. Everything about our life felt balanced. There was nothing in our life that needed double-checking anymore. By early afternoon, I sent him a short message. Nothing demanding, nothing needy. "Hope your day's going okay." The reply didn't come immediately, but that wasn't unusual. I didn't check the time twice. I didn't reread the message. I didn't attach meaning where there wasn't any. I trusted the space. I trusted the rhythm we had built over time. The chocolates stayed on the counter, untouched, waiting. I passed by them more than once, catching a glimpse of the dark packaging, feeling a quiet satisfaction that I hadn't overdone it, that I hadn't turned Chocolate Day into something performative. Outside, the world moved loudly. Stores advertised discounts, couples posed with gift bags, social feeds filled with glossy versions of love that always looked louder than mine. And for the first time, I remember thinking, not with doubt, but with certainty, that I was okay with ours being quieter. Evening crept in slowly, the way it does when you're not watching the clock. I started dinner without any particular plan, just something warm, something easy. I expected him home at the usual time, maybe a little late, maybe distracted. Nothing that would have felt wrong. When my phone buzzed, I glanced at it without urgency. A message. Brief, neutral, running late, meeting stacked up. I read it once, then again. It didn't alarm me. It didn't hurt me. It just shifted something slightly. I replied with a simple, okay, and set the phone down. The chocolates stayed where they were. I remember standing there, wooden spoon in hand, realizing how much meaning I had attached to something so small. Not the day itself, but the expectation of alignment, of timing, of presence. Still, I told myself not to read into it. Chocolate Day wasn't an obligation. Love wasn't measured by punctuality. I turned the heat down. I plated the food. I waited. There was no anger in that waiting, no fear, no suspicion, just patience, just belief. At that point, I still believed that Chocolate Day was exactly what it had always been, a quiet marker in a life that felt steady, shared, and safe. I didn't know yet that the sweetness I had chosen so carefully was about to mean something entirely else. But that day, in that moment, standing in my kitchen with a simple gift and no questions, I was still fully inside the story I thought we were living. I believed it was enough because I hadn't learned yet what belief costs when it isn't questioned. Chocolate Day ended without an argument. That was the first thing that stayed with me. There was no slammed door, no raised voice, no moment that looks dramatic enough to remember later. The house simply moved forward without him noticing what the day had been meant to hold. By late afternoon, the light in the kitchen had shifted. The sun no longer landed on the counter where I had left the chocolates. It slid across the floor instead, slow and indifferent, like time did not care what I had been waiting for. He texted once, running late, meeting stacked, I'll make it up to you. I didn't read the message twice. I didn't need to. It sounded like him, efficient, reasonable, complete. The kind of explanation that didn't invite questions because it felt familiar. I replied with a simple okay, not because I was disappointed, but because I wasn't yet. Dinner cooled on the stove, the chocolate bag stayed untouched. I moved it once just to clear space, then put it back exactly where it had been. That detail stayed with me later, how carefully I kept it visible, as if love worked better when it could still be seen. He came home after 9, not rushed, not guilty, just tired in the way people look when their day has been productive somewhere else. He kissed my cheek, asked how my day was, mentioned a budget review that had run longer than expected. Numbers came up casually, revenue projections, upcoming travel, how the bonus structure might shift this quarter. Money had always been something we spoke about calmly. We shared accounts, plans, expectations. Our savings sat just under 50,000, steady and deliberate. We talked about them the way people talk about weather, present, manageable, unthreatening. He didn't mention Chocolate Day. Not once. I didn't mention it either. That was the second thing that stayed with me. How easily silence replaced what should have been obvious. Later that night, while he showered, I cleared the counter. The chocolates went into the cabinet, unopened. I told myself it didn't matter, that days were symbols, not tests, that love wasn't measured by calendars. And I meant it. At least, I thought I did. The first fracture didn't arrive as pain. It arrived as misalignment. A few days later, I noticed a transaction while reviewing our account. 15,000 had moved out, clean and fast. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't flagged. It sat there like it belonged. Normally, I would have remembered. Large transfers were conversations for us. I assumed I had forgotten. Later that week, another charge appeared. Smaller, but specific, travel-related. Booked midweek, no itinerary mentioned, no explanation offered. Again, I didn't panic. Again, I didn't confront. Instead, something quieter happened. I began to remember more carefully. I remembered how often his meetings now ended late, how weekends were suddenly flexible, how his phone stayed face down, not secretive, just deliberate. None of it was dramatic. That was the problem. When betrayal announces itself loudly, you know where to look. When it arrives wrapped in routine, it teaches you to doubt your own instincts. One evening, I overheard him on a call from the hallway. His voice was familiar, steady, professional, but softened in a way I hadn't heard in months. Not flirtatious, just present. He ended the call when he noticed me, said it was work. I nodded. Later, alone, I stood in the kitchen again. Same counter, same cabinet, the chocolates still inside, unchanged, like a paused moment waiting for permission to move forward. That was when the thought arrived, not as accusation, but as clarity. This wasn't about forgetting a holiday. It was about something slowly being redirected. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance, the kind that doesn't announce itself but rearranges everything quietly. From that moment on, I stopped filling in the gaps for him. I didn't assume anymore. I observed. Dates, times, amounts. The numbers told a cleaner story than emotions ever could. By the end of that week, I understood something without needing proof yet. This was no longer about love. It was about truth and how gently it had been slipping past me, disguised as normal life. And the most unsettling part wasn't what I suspected, it was how long I had been standing inside certainty, believing nothing needed to be checked anymore. I didn't start watching him because I was angry. I started watching because something inside me went quiet. After Chocolate Day passed, life didn't collapse. That's what surprised me the most. Our mornings still followed the same rhythm. Coffee brewed at the same time. The house still smelled familiar. He still kissed my forehead before leaving, still smiled when he came back. From the outside, nothing had broken. But internally, I had stopped reacting. I wasn't hurt in the dramatic way people expect. I wasn't replaying conversations or imagining explanations. I was noticing details, not emotionally, but sequentially, one thing after another, like lining up facts on a table and realizing they didn't belong to the same story. The first thing I noticed was timing. The $12,480 transaction hadn't happened randomly. It landed during the same week as Chocolate Day, not on the day itself, but close enough that the overlap felt intentional. I didn't attach meaning to it immediately. I simply wrote the date down, not in a journal, in my head. A few days later, while reviewing our shared account, something I had done casually for years, another number appeared, $9,800. Different amounts, same source, same destination type. Again, I didn't react. I didn't confront him. I didn't even feel betrayed yet. What I felt was a shift, like love had quietly stepped aside to make room for attention. I started paying closer attention to patterns I had once trusted blindly. He had always been consistent with money. That was one of the reasons I felt safe in our marriage. Bills were paid early, savings grew steadily. We had crossed $48,000 in joint savings not long ago, and it had felt like an unspoken milestone, proof that we were building something solid. That's why the irregularities stood out. Within the next 2 months, I noticed more transfers. $14,200, $11,650. Each one spaced just far enough apart to avoid looking connected, each one pulling from accounts we had always referred to as future plans. The numbers weren't reckless, they were careful, almost respectful. That's when I understood something important. This wasn't impulsive behavior, it was managed behavior. I stopped asking myself why and started asking when. When did these transfers usually happen? When was he traveling? When did his schedule shift slightly? I didn't spy, I didn't sneak, I simply observed the rhythm of our life the way you do when you're trying to understand music, listening for repetition. Emotionally, something else was happening too. My language inside my head changed. I stopped using words like hurt, confused, disappointed. Those belonged to love. What I was experiencing now required different terms. Neutral ones, accurate ones. I realized then that this was no longer about love. It was about truth. And truth didn't require raised voices. It required alignment. Chocolate Day had been about visible sweetness, something you could hold, unwrap, offer. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I had focused on what was tangible, something intangible had been moving quietly underneath our life. Money doesn't leave emotional clues, it leaves records. I began organizing information mentally the same way I organized our pantry or calendar. No judgment, just placement. Dates, amounts, frequency. I noticed that the transfers often followed days when he came home lighter than usual, more relaxed, less present. At the time, I had interpreted that as comfort. Now I understood it as completion. Still, I said nothing. There was power in not filling the silence too early. I didn't cry at night, I slept. I didn't rehearse confrontations, I reviewed timelines. I didn't check his phone, I checked consistency. And the consistency was undeniable. Each transaction stayed below a level that would raise automatic flags. Each amount felt intentional, not excessive, not careless. This wasn't about financial strain. It was about financial redirection. One evening, I stood in the kitchen and noticed the chocolates again. They were still there, unopened, unmoved. I didn't feel sad looking at them. I felt clarity. They had become symbolic in a way I hadn't expected. They represented what I had been willing to take at face value, sweetness without inspection. I closed the cabinet gently and walked away. From that moment on, my role changed. I wasn't a wife waiting for reassurance anymore. I was a woman collecting context. I began separating facts from feelings, and the process was strangely calming. There was dignity in accuracy, strength in restraint. I wasn't losing myself, I was refining myself. The more I understood the numbers, the quieter my emotions became. That's when I knew the midpoint had passed. There was no turning back to belief. There was only forward movement into clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, doesn't ask permission to stay. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting geometric patterns across the floor. I moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if the quiet rhythm of my day could mirror the clarity I was building inside. Chocolate day had passed, but its essence lingered. The untouched bag on the counter remained a small, silent witness. I didn't need to touch it. Its mere presence reminded me of balance, of patience, of the sweetness that had once been straightforward, but now required measured attention. I poured a cup of coffee, the steam curling in delicate spirals, and sat down at the kitchen table. Everything seemed ordinary, mundane even, but my mind was mapping details with a precision it had never required before. I reviewed statements, receipts, and calendar entries, each piece falling into place like tiles in a mosaic that depicted the larger picture. The rhythm of numbers and dates felt almost meditative. The $12,480 transfer, the $9,800 repetition, the $14,200 midweek deposit. I didn't flinch, I didn't react, I simply observed. Authority doesn't arrive with confrontation. It arrives with preparation, patience, and paper. I opened my laptop and began organizing every record, categorizing transactions, and creating visual timelines. Each entry was a quiet assertion of control, a nonverbal statement that I was aware, alert, and calculating. I didn't announce the changes I was making. I let outcomes speak instead, as access shifted and expectations quietly adjusted. I paused when a subtle insight struck me. Patterns that had previously felt random now revealed intent. Reallocation wasn't emotional, it was systematic. The total exposure had quietly crossed $67,000, a sum that anchored the betrayal in undeniable reality. Numbers confirmed what I had only begun to suspect, a quiet, repeated reallocation that could no longer be ignored. The rhythm of withdrawals, the timing of deposits, all pointed to a story I had to respect for its clarity, if not its comfort. Every action I took was procedural. I opened new accounts, redirected income, documented every step, not for confrontation, but for control. It was a language without words, and yet it spoke volumes. I could feel the subtle power shift without raising a voice or writing a single accusatory sentence. There were no dramatic confrontations, no angry declarations. The authority was silent, procedural, methodical, and in that silence, it resonated. The chocolate bag remained untouched, almost mocking in its simplicity. I straightened it once more, aligning it neatly on the counter, a small gesture that symbolized the order I was restoring. In a way, it anchored me, reminding me that while human trust could falter, diligence and foresight could preserve dignity. Each chocolate square, each untouched wrapper, was a subtle counterpoint to the numbers I scrutinized. Sweetness persisted even amid disruption if only one observed closely enough. My focus was surgical. I made notes on who had access to which account, the duration of each transaction, and the intent inferred from patterns. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been a distraction. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking clarity. Every spreadsheet row, every categorized entry was a line in a narrative that didn't need embellishment. The financial story spoke clearly on its own. I thought back to Part 2's subtle fracture and Part 3's realization. Love was no longer the lens. Truth had replaced it, and truth had receipts. I marveled at the quiet symmetry of it all, the way numbers, dates, and patterns converged to form an irrefutable record. The same $48,000 savings that once signified security now illuminated gaps, choices, and silent shifts of priority. The $15,000 bonus that had been celebrated as a reward for effort now contrasted starkly with allocations made without consultation, without acknowledgement. In the legal meeting later that week, I presented the organized files calmly. The questions I was asked weren't emotional, they were structural. Verification of timing, source of funds, purpose. Each question reinforced my earlier analysis. Silence in the room amplified the weight of the documents more than words ever could. Money didn't need commentary, it was eloquent enough. At one point, I noticed a slight hesitation in the professional's voice, not because of doubt, but because the pattern was clear. $67,000+ had moved in predictable, calculated ways. Every figure told a story, and no explanation, no excuse could contradict what the records revealed. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, I observed. Authority had arrived, quietly, firmly, and entirely on my terms. Back home, the chocolate bag on the counter caught my eye again. The simplicity of that gesture, the daily act of giving, of sustaining sweetness, contrasted so sharply with the complexity revealed by numbers. Chocolate Day, I realized, had been a symbol not of ignorance, but of honest expectations. It hadn't lied. People had. Money had merely confirmed it. I allowed myself a slow exhale, noticing for the first time in months that my internal pace matched my external reality. The world outside could continue with its rhythms, its distractions, its obligations. Within this ordered, silent, procedural universe I had constructed, clarity reigned. Every action had a purpose, every number a voice, every chocolate a reminder that life's sweetness could coexist with vigilance. Preparation became my language, organization became my authority, observation became my tool. I didn't need confrontation to assert my dignity. I didn't need drama to cement control. Each carefully recorded transaction, each redirected income stream, each spreadsheet entry was a quiet manifestation of power. And yet, there was an elegance to the process. No shouting, no bitterness, just meticulous, unassailable control. The chocolate on the counter symbolized continuity. The numbers symbolized accountability. Together, they formed a framework that ensured the future I was building would remain intact, funded, and independent. I checked the last line in my ledger. It was complete, verified, and precise. I closed my laptop and stood. The light through the blinds caught the dust particles in slow arcs. Even in the smallest details, there was order. Even in silence, there was power. The quiet authority I had cultivated was now a living, breathing part of my reality. The numbers, the chocolate, the procedures, they all converged to a single, undeniable truth. Control didn't come from confrontation, and clarity didn't come from chaos. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. Chocolate Day's memory, once sweet and unexamined, now contained layers of awareness, vigilance, and disciplined strength. The lessons of finance, of patterns, of careful observation had merged seamlessly with the symbolism of trust and love. And in the calm of that morning, I understood that preparation, patience, and silent authority were more potent than any dramatic confrontation. The room was quiet. The chocolate bag was untouched. My spreadsheets were closed. My accounts were separated and documented. I walked to the window, looking at the world outside, and felt an unshakable certainty. The foundation I had built would hold, regardless of anything else. Chocolate Day hadn't lied. It had reflected reality, waiting for me to read it fully. And now I had. The final weeks had brought a sense of quiet inevitability. I moved through the house with a new rhythm, one dictated not by affection or expectation, but by the careful architecture of my own clarity. The chocolate bag still rested on the counter, its presence no longer sentimental, but emblematic of the life I had chosen to preserve. Sweetness intact, yet observed, understood, and no longer taken for granted. Every morning I straightened it without fanfare, a ritual that felt almost ceremonial. It was my anchor, a reminder that the gestures we cherish can outlast the frailty of trust when we learn to measure their significance with discernment. The financial ledgers lay spread across the dining table, a tapestry of numbers that had once hidden deceit. Now, each entry, $12,480, $9,800, $14,200, $11,650, spoke with crystalline clarity. I traced each transfer, noting the dates, the origins, the context. What had once felt like confusion or imbalance was now a narrative written in numbers, and the narrative was unflinching. No drama, no accusations, just facts, each demanding attention and acknowledgement. I had learned to listen, not to words, but to the story accounts told silently. In the quiet of the evenings, I found myself reflecting on the patience that had brought me here. Months of observation, cataloging, and discreet recalibration had accumulated into authority. I had redirected income streams, opened new accounts, and ensured every shared asset was appropriately accounted for. None of it was about confrontation, it was about control, procedural and immutable. Each action was deliberate, a physical manifestation of the calm I had cultivated internally. Silence was my partner, and precision my instrument. The lawyer's words had been simple, almost understated. You've documented everything. Nothing else needs to be said. And that was enough. Authority did not need to raise its voice. It only needed to exist, consistent and undeniable. Chocolate Day had once represented uncomplicated joy. Now it served as a mirror, reflecting both what was and what I had to secure. The small bar, the carefully selected box, was no longer a token of naive expectation. It had become a symbol of measured care, the tangible reassurance of continuity in a life I was architecting with intention. Its presence, juxtaposed against the stark precision of the accounts, reminded me that sweetness could coexist with vigilance. One could savor the flavor without surrendering to its illusion. I placed the chocolates beside my notes, a deliberate pairing of indulgence and insight, a quiet nod to the duality of human experience. As the final documents were signed and accounts clarified, a profound stillness settled over me. The total exposure of $67,000 plus was no longer a source of anxiety, but a confirmation of foresight and meticulous action. The numbers themselves were a testament to vigilance, accountability, and patience. Each dollar had been accounted for, each transaction understood, and in that understanding, I found empowerment. The past week's patterns had revealed the truth, but now the future was mine to define, structured and protected. There was no need for revenge or dramatics. The resolution was embedded in the reality I had constructed, and its inevitability carried a quiet satisfaction that no spectacle could replicate. I stepped to the window, looking out at the familiar streets bathed in late afternoon light. The world continued, oblivious to the silent reckoning that had unfolded within these walls. I felt no bitterness, only clarity. Each gesture, each record, each chocolate had played its part in the story that had brought me here. Love, once naive and unguarded, had transformed into discernment, and betrayal, once hidden in plain sight, had been illuminated by diligence. My independence, both financial and emotional, was no longer aspirational. It was concrete, tangible, and unassailable. The conversations I had rehearsed in my mind were unnecessary. No confrontation awaited, for truth had already spoken in its own language, numbers, documents, and the deliberate orchestration of careful steps. The silence in the house was not emptiness, but authority made manifest. I moved through it like a conductor through a symphony, each motion considered, each pause significant. The weight of past doubts had been replaced with the weight of certainty, measured and calibrated. Chocolate Day returned to its quiet prominence. I unwrapped a piece, letting it melt slowly, mindful of the flavor, conscious of the symbolism. It was a moment of reflection, not indulgence, a reminder that sweetness existed alongside discernment and that joy need not be blind. The day, once marked by expectation and subtle dissonance, now represented equilibrium, an acknowledgement that life and love coexist with responsibility and insight. The law, the numbers, the careful structuring of reality all had converged to create a foundation that could not be shaken. There was no triumph in exposure, no vindication in confrontation. The true victory lay in stability, dignity, and quiet sovereignty. Each decision, each precaution, each procedural step had been a brick in the wall of self-respect and foresight. The world beyond these walls remained unaware of the invisible scaffolding I had erected, yet its presence was undeniable to me. The house was no longer just a home, it was a space of certainty, measured and safeguarded. Evenings became a ritual of review and reflection. I revisited the accounts, confirmed the allocations, and monitored the trajectory of all resources. The numbers were my companions, my narrators, speaking truths that words could no longer obscure. The chocolate remained nearby, a constant counterpoint to the precise, methodical orchestration of life. Together, they formed a balance, the tangible sweetness of life alongside the rigor of structured independence. I found myself unburdened by expectation, unshaken by past naivety. The lessons learned were embedded, forming a template for future discernment. Every transaction, every precaution, every silent observation had culminated in a reality where I no longer depended on assumption or trust alone. The knowledge of truth, systematically gathered, had become the bedrock of my agency. Chocolate Day, once a day of hopeful delight, had guided me towards a deeper understanding that sweetness is best appreciated when paired with vigilance, and love is best navigated with clarity. As night fell, the house was enveloped in calm. The chocolate bag, the ledgers, the accounts, all were in their proper place. My reflection in the kitchen window revealed not anxiety, not bitterness, but quiet strength. I had navigated the turbulence without spectacle, without outburst, and without losing myself. The numbers had spoken, the patterns had revealed themselves, and my actions had secured both dignity and stability. Financially, emotionally, procedurally, I was complete. Chocolate Day did not lie, people did. The transactions, the careful observation, the deliberate structuring of life all confirmed it. There was no need for accusation, no necessity for confrontation. The sweet rituals persisted alongside the sober reality, and I moved forward with a clear sense of self, independent and unwavering. In that quiet space, enveloped by numbers, chocolate, and reflection, I realized that the narrative of my life had been rewritten, not by anger, not by exposure, but by calm, deliberate action. And in that realization, I found a new kind of joy, unshakable, grounded, and profoundly my own.